April 12, 1862 was an anniversary nobody thought they'd ever see. Nobody thought the war would last more than a few weeks, much less a full year. Even worse, it was only the first of 3 more anniversaries that would come and go before the war was over.
The main thing the armies did during that year was to position themselves. Grant was positioning himself to take Vicksburg. And this required a lot of marching, but not a lot of action. And the second year of the war saw practically a new army in. And you have all of these young men who come in and their immune systems have not been tested. So you see disease take a horrible total.
You just keep finding them. I'll look down a list and find men that were not listed as having died. And we're getting up into the hundreds of men that were not even listed as having died during the war. And I found later on that they had died, it just didn't get recorded. And the majority of those deaths are all from disease.
And desertion became a problem at the beginning of the second year of the war.
Desertion became so bad that Private A.B. Richards, Company H, 27th Illinois Infantry, wrote his sister, "The Army are scattered all over the country and deserting by hundreds. The woods is full of guns thrown away by them. I am tired of fighting."
Richards, I think, like so many of the soldiers, went into this war thinking that it was going to be over with quickly. They were going to step in, they were going to stop this rebellion, and they were going to go home. Didn't work that way.
Logan was wounded very badly at Donelson, and he had to go home. It was his actions there, however, that would have him promoted to generalship, and he would miss Shiloh. The man who helped get that promotion for him was U.S. Grant. Well, Grant, on the other hand, was blamed by Halleck for Shiloh, and so Halleck didn't fire Grant, he just pushed him down the chain of command and took over the command of the entire armies himself.
Afraid of another Shiloh, Halleck ordered trenches dug after each day's advance. This probably did not set well with the boys from Egypt, and an angry Logan vowed, "My men will never dig another ditch for Halleck except to bury him." In Jackson, Tennessee, Logan and his men finally saw the true nature of slavery and its deeply ingrained racial prejudices, and some soldiers' attitudes began to soften.
One thing that affected probably Logan and his men both was the story of Zella. Escaped from her owner. He was keeping her in what was euphemistically called bedroom bondage. This probably struck a chord with Logan, who was a stout Methodist and a fairly moral person when it came to things like that. And they would protect Zella, they would take her in, and they would give her her freedom. She was tricked into going back to seeing her master on his deathbed, and in truth, he wasn't dying. And he took her and ferreted her away and sold her down to Georgia. So slavery wasn't exactly what the men of Southern Illinois had thought it was.
The war seemed to grind to a halt. Summer's big changes affected Egypt's civilians much more than its soldiers. It became clear the war was not going to end quickly. In July, Lincoln called for 300,000 additional volunteers. Emily Wiley of Jackson County wrote to her husband, Lieutenant Colonel Ben Wiley, 5th Illinois Cavalry.
The president calls for 300,000 men. I think his call will be responded to promptly, although I had hoped this war would soon be over. I want you home with me.
Emily Wiley is a good example of what was happening with women then. The roles that women played before the Civil War changed drastically when the war began and all the men left. They were now in charge of all the things they had been in charge of before, the children and the meals and the gardens, but now they were in charge of the big fields. They were in charge of the livestock. They were in charge of business deals. It was all on their shoulders to take care of this.
Congress created pensions for widows, orphans, and invalids. It also gave President Lincoln the power to draft individuals for 9 months if not enough men volunteered. To pay for this, the federal government created America's first income tax.
And you have to understand that Southern Illinois was strongly Democratic. It was Jacksonian Democratic. It had a strong belief in the Union. But it also had this strong sense of Americans having rights. So that when November came around, Southern Illinois handed a defeat to the Republicans, but not only Southern Illinois, but all of Illinois did. And it was just a backlash against all of the changes that the war had brought about. It was a different world after the war than it was before.
As the summer progressed, dissatisfaction with the war grew, and many citizens grew quite vocal. In August, Secretary of War Edwin Stanton issued an order to arrest and imprison without need for trial anybody who discouraged enlistments, gave aid and comfort to the enemy, or was suspected of any other disloyal practice. This edict targeted organizations like the Knights of the Golden Circle and the Peace Democrats, called Copperheads. In August, an article in the Chicago Tribune reported that almost 400 men attended a KGC meeting near Pinckneyville, Illinois. Its anonymous author reported that among those who attended were Logan's brother-in-law, Israel Blanchard, and his brother, Tom Logan, who openly resolved to support the Confederacy. Blanchard, but not Tom, was soon arrested. Logan, at his sister Annie Blanchard's request, returned to Murphysboro in late August and gathered depositions in her husband's defense. He sent these, along with a cover letter, to President Lincoln, stating, "Dr. Blanchard is a peaceable citizen and I believe a loyal man to this government. If he is guilty of any treasonable action or language, I have nothing to say in his defense. But knowing as I do his former conduct and demeanor as a citizen, I cannot believe him guilty." Lincoln ordered Secretary of War Stanton to release Blanchard.
They swept through Southern Illinois and made a lot of prominent arrests, and they had arrested Josh Allen, who was a sitting member of the House of Representatives. He represented Illinois' 9th Congressional District, Logan's old district, and they had arrested Logan's brother-in-law. By the end of November, these men are back home, and no charges was ever really made.
By late September, nearly 5,000 Egyptian volunteers entered the Union Army. On the 22nd of that month, President Lincoln informed the Confederate states that if they did not return to the Union by year's end, he would free all slaves in the rebelling states. In October, the Battle of Corinth took the lives of 20 of Egypt's boys, and the Battle of Perryville, Kentucky, took 4 more. These Union victories secured an important rail connection and drove the Confederates from Kentucky. During this time, however, Egypt's warriors were more likely to be fighting the everyday realities of soldiering than the rebels. Realities which tested their moral fiber.
Dear Aunt, I have smoked cigars. I have played cards, but not for money, just for fun. And I have drank 3 drams of whiskey. Now, Aunt, for your sakes and my parents' sakes, and the sake of one that loves me well, I will quit all these habits and come home an honest and upright man. The Army is a hard place. Stamps cost 5 cents apiece. They charge 10 cents for a candle and $5 for a woolen shirt. Everything is high.
In today's dollars, the stamp would cost $1.13, the candle $2.27, and the shirt $113.34, and supplementing their rations.
There is some men here that kills a hog every night, but they keep it sly from the officers.
Worst of all, it tested their ability to survive the devastating effect of homesickness, depression, and unexpected illness. Lieutenant Colonel Ben Wiley, 5th Illinois Cavalry.
My dear wife, I have gradually become weak and debilitated, as to be almost unable to sit up or walk, but have not much fever for 11 days. I find that I am improving, but soon get tired, so you must excuse me. I would come home, but it's almost impossible to get off.
These men, a lot of them left being very gung-ho, very patriotic, wanting to get out there and fight these battles and save the Union. And I don't think it played out the way they thought it was going to play out. A lot of them weren't dying gallantly on the battlefields. They were dying in tents, in the mud and the dirt, in disease and slow, awful deaths. And at the same time, they're getting letters from home saying how bad things are there and how much they're needed at home. And so they're being pulled. They want to save their country, but they're watching everyone die around them of disease. And they're missing their homes, and they know they're needed there. And so desertion, I don't want to say is appealing, but it definitely had to have crossed every one of their minds. It had to have been a hard thing to make themselves stay there and continue to fight and take a chance of dying either from a bullet or from disease when they knew their families at home needed them.
You know, these soldiers had been young men who were close to home. I mean, they had never traveled far, and at this point in time, they were away from home, quite a distance. They were surrounded by death. They were surrounded by sickness. They had left the responsibilities to the women they had left back home, and they were concerned. They were worried. So they wanted to know what was going on back home. And just the connectedness, I think, that the letter provides. When you hold that letter, then you're holding a piece of that person you love. You're holding a piece of your wife, you know, and you're seeing what she's seeing. And I think that's why the soldiers wrote more letters than they received. And they would continually say, please write every time you get a chance. Because I think they were suffering from a disconnectedness that even the folks at home maybe didn't.
The Lincoln administration's implementation of income taxes and draft laws and indiscriminate arrests for what many Egyptians felt was free speech assured a Democratic landslide in November's elections. This so elated 60-year-old Captain Hezekiah C. Hodges, Company C, 18th Illinois Infantry, that he wrote home, "I'm the same old Democrat I always was. I'm not Lincolnized, nor do I think ever will be. I was so glad to hear the state went Democratic that I could hardly contain my water."
And Josh Allen, who had been arrested and held in Old Capitol Prison as a traitor, was elected back to the House of Representatives. And Logan's brother-in-law, Israel Blanchard, went to the Illinois State Senate. So there was a Democratic backlash in all of Illinois, not just Southern Illinois.
But even a political victory could not raise spirits as disease continued to cut through the camps.
There has been a death at the hospital every day for 5 days and going, all from the 81st Regiment. While I am writing in one tent, there is a man dying in the tent next to me by the name of John Carter. It's a hard thing to die away from home. I hope I will not get sick where you can't be with me.
So you see in letters that they say, well, you know, maybe a bullet will take me, but it's almost sure that disease will take me. I don't know the impact it would have on your mind, because you go into battle and you fight and the battle's over and you should be safe, you should be able to relax. But you come back to a camp in which you left behind sick men who had died, and there are now more people coming down with diseases and dying. So you never had that sense that I'm behind the lines, I'm out of battle, I can breathe for a minute, I don't have to worry about dying. I think it would have been terrible.
Carter died in December in Oxford, Mississippi. Captain M.F. Smith, Company E, 81st Illinois Infantry, wrote his widow, "Mrs. Carter, it becomes my most painful duty to inform you of the death of your beloved husband. Death visited him in the character of congestion of the brain. He died as he had lived, a true patriot and soldier. I had him a neat coffin made and wrapped him in his blanket and buried him on a high, dry spot. Also had a plank planed nicely, and his name, company, and regiment neatly written on it." On December 20th, 1862, Confederate forces attacked Holly Springs, capturing or destroying the Union supplies stored there. Grant retreated to Memphis. This left Egypt's boys little to eat and little to celebrate.
Our rations are now 2 hardtacks, a quarter of a pound of beef, a small quantity of tea and sugar for 1 day's allowance for each man. General Logan issued an order for the boys to make lye hominy by boiling ashes, washing and cleaning corn, and then cooking it. Some of the boys call it fodder.
Lieutenant John Reese, Company E, 81st Illinois Infantry. In his diary, Sergeant Edmund Newsom, Company B, 81st Illinois Infantry, confided, "This is Christmas Day, 1862, but very few seem to remember the fact. We camped but were ordered to march in 15 minutes with empty haversacks and empty stomachs." At year's end, Lieutenant John P. Reese reflected on many things. The horrors of war. "Oh, what a cruel thing war is. The whole county is laid waste. 2 big armies passing through it, taking and burning as they go. It is hard to tell which the people have suffered the most from, their friends or their foes." Home. I just lay on my oilcloth flat of my back, with the frost falling on my face, thinking how different I would be at home if I was there sleeping in a warm house. And reality. When the old drum beat began to start again, we got up and ate a few crackers and started on our journey. This is part of a soldier's life. Winter and the war were hard on soldiers and civilians alike. The history of the 81st Infantry reports that this winter was the gloomiest period of the war, when the Copperheads and the Knights of the Golden Circle were the most active, and desertion was at its highest. In January 1863, a war-weary Mary Jane Richards Cummings wrote to her sister, Emmeline Butcher,
"I think it is too wretched to think how our men does manage this war business. I wish I had the power that God has. It would be brought to a close at the twinkle of an eye. I would say, peace, be still, and if it did not stop at that, I would command a clap of thunder and lightning to the secesh, and that would put an end to secessiondom double quick."
On New Year's Day, 1863, President Lincoln signed the Emancipation Proclamation. This action came at the midpoint of the Battle of Stones River. At that point, the thrust of the war changed. It was no longer just about saving the Union, it was also about freeing the slaves. Once they had time to think, it seems that Lincoln's proclamation was not welcomed by many of Egypt's soldiers. Unlike their officers who could resign, if an enlisted man disagreed with the president's policy, his only option was desertion. This problem finally forced General Logan to address his troops on February 12th. "While I rely upon you with confidence and pride, I blush to confess that recently many have forgotten their honor, their oaths, and their country as to shamefully desert us. The scorn and contempt of every true man will ever follow these base men. March bravely onward. When this great work is accomplished, the reward for such service as yours will be realized. The blessings and honors of a grateful people will be yours." Logan would order his old friend Colonel Lindorf Osborne to resign. Osborne returned home to become an active peace Democrat. The fear of becoming sick and dying also drove men to desert. Captain John Reese wrote his wife on February 25, 1863, "We have several sick at the hospital, and I expect some of them are dead. You see, it don't take a company long to get small, even if it don't get into battle." When Grant discovered that Logan had been passed over for a promotion, he advised the president, "I see the name of N.B. Buford for Major General. He would scarcely make a respectable hospital nurse if put in petticoats." Grant suggested Logan's promotion, and Lincoln complied. With emancipation came the formation of black regiments. To address a possible backlash, Union volunteers were gathered for an explanation of the policy in April 1863 at Lake Providence, Louisiana. Many of the soldiers booed and hissed General Lorenzo Thomas, the first speaker. After a short speech, General McPherson introduced General John A. Logan, who stood before the men and thundered, "We must hurt the rebels in every way possible. So we'll unite on this policy, putting the one who is the innocent cause of this war in the front rank, and press on to victory." The gathered soldiers cheered, and after this little more was said about the use of black troops. Captain John P. Reese stated his views on emancipation and his reason for remaining in the Army in letters home.
"You know I am no abolitionist, but I hear the voice of President Andrew Jackson speaking in tones of thunder. The Union must be preserved. I am ready to fall by the bullet, or the more sure enemy, disease. or perhaps return as an invalid for life. I would rather come home in a wooden coat than come home a disgrace to my country, my children, and myself.
Reese is another one that wrote some fantastic letters. He should have been an author instead of a soldier. He's very adamant about everything he feels, and he expresses it very well in the letters. And he's getting letters from home from people saying, why are you fighting to end slavery? Why are you out there? Why are you doing this? And he explains that he is not here to end slavery. That's not what he's fighting for. He is fighting to save the Union, and he doesn't want to be known as an abolitionist. He just wants people to understand that he's there. He has gone forward to save the Union, and he's not coming home until it's done.
Despite the disbanding of regiments, desertions, and the resignation of a few officers, Egypt remained loyal to the Union cause. 42% of the eligible men of Logan's 9th Congressional District were serving in the Union Army. The state average was 29%.
In that second year of the war to this point, we found 1,050 deaths. 90 of them can be attributed to combat. And I'm sure there's more, but this is what we know to this point. 90 combat deaths, a few accidents, a lot of people there's no cause of death listed. Generally, if there's no cause of death listed, that cause of death was disease. And we're slowly whittling these down. The percentage of men who died from disease in that second year of the war could be as high as 89%. These men went in to save the Union, and there was that element in them that wanted to be in battle, and the glory of battle. They wanted to see the elephant, and so awfully many of them died of disease.
On April 11, 1863, the war's second anniversary, Grant and his army were poised to take Vicksburg, the South's last great bastion on the Mississippi. Those new recruits who still longed to see the elephant would soon get their wish.